All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Simply Cyber Firesides. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Gerald Auger, and today we're going to be going hard into Microsoft Azure Cybersecurity Research with my man, Matt Kiely, also known as Husky Hacks. He's a principal cybersecurity researcher at Huntress, specializing in identity threat detection and response. Matt's the creator also of Practical Malware Analysis and Triage, or the PMAT, a course that has educated over 70,000 students worldwide. This guy is what's the word I'm looking for? Stranger to hooking it up, helping people, and just delivering amazing results. And his recent groundbreaking research into OAuth app attacks revealed critical vulnerabilities lurking within Microsoft 365 tenants, including potentially your own. And by analyzing millions of service principals across thousands of tenants, Matt developed Cazadora, an open source tool that simplifies auditing in Azure application environments. And we're going to be looking at it. Roll up your sleeves and get ready to get filthy, because we are going to be doing live tech demos, and make sure you sacrifice to the gods as always. Matt's expertise is backed by his experience as a former principal cybersecurity research engineer at SimSpace, his certifications as a certified red team operator and OSCP, and his background as a USMC Marine Corps veteran all contribute to his skill set. In his own words, he turns cyber criminals into examples. As always, I strongly encourage you to drop your questions in the comments section during the conversation. We are here for you, community. Hashtag Team SC. I see the pain in here. Mary Ellen Kennel, Elliot Woodward, Viper, Nil, Blood, Sweat, and Rage, Kenneth Lowy, and Jason Eystone, just to name a few. Drop links to share this with your stream right now. This is a renegade random noon on a Monday Simply Cyber Firesides, but we wanted to get this information to you as soon as possible, because the work Matt's doing can have profound impact on your ability to drive cyber risk reduction for your business stakeholders today. All right, join me together. If you're a squad member, drop your Oprah emotes in chat, as we love doing those for our guests. And let's go get Matt Kiely and let's light this candle. All right, Matt, what's cracking, buddy?
The hype, brother. The hype. I need to hire you to do like an intro every morning I wake up and sit down at my desk. I feel like I can take on the world right now. That's unbelievably kind of all those things that you just said, and I really appreciate it. And I want to say, it's crazy to me that I'm now in the presence and on the show of an award-winning podcast. So I just want to say congratulations on the award.
Thank you. Yeah, we got the little key right here.
Yep, there it is.
In the background, subtly located.
I saw the acceptance speech, and it brought up some emotions for me just to see you make it like that. So let's have some fun today, Jerry. And thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. I told people at Huntress, because they were like, wow, Jerry has a lot of subscribers, but I actually haven't seen much of his work. And I was like, Jerry's like, the way I could describe him is he's like Nardwar in the InfoSec space, which is like, you make time for Jerry. Drop whatever you're doing at that current moment, because if Jerry wants an interview, he is the best in the field. He always does the research. He always brings the hype. He always brings the positive energy. So I've been looking forward to this. And yeah, it's great to see you again. How have you been since the last time?
Dude, I've been wonderful. Life is good. The community's got, great vibes. I got to go to, we're doing Simply CyberCon, Matt. I don't know if you'll be able to come this year, but we're doing it. We did it in person last year. We're going bigger this year in person. It's just so cool. Everything just keeps moving in the right direction, and the vibes are good. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so the reason I asked Matt to come on, y'all, is because Matt posted something on LinkedIn about his Azure research and just how gnarly everyone is. And listen, if Matt says something that kind of looks like fear and uncertainty and doom, it's not because he's trying to scare you into taking action. He's just telling you objectively what it is. And it just happens to be scary as F.
I can appreciate that. Maybe some of you have noticed that I've really stepped back on my kind of like social content kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like my presence in the content.
Yeah,
and I'm really in like a deep work research mode right now. And I try to use, because I'm very scarce on social media these days, but I try to use that so that when I place something out on social media, I'm really hoping that people will listen. And this is one of those examples where I found the perfect overlapping spheres of like tradecraft that I think not everybody is really thinking about or aware of, and then findings when researching that tradecraft that made me think this is a bigger problem than I think anybody is really anticipating. And I found one of those, and I'm hoping that just by presenting the facts and spreading the word and talking a little bit about the tradecraft, maybe I can get people to think think about the attack surface of OAuth applications in a different light.
Yeah, so let's talk about Azure just for a minute, because we were talking before we went live in the green room, and Matt and I have both dealt with this professionally. There is, at least 5 years ago, there was this idea that the cloud was just like your data center in the sky, and like it was a lift and shift. And that really is not an accurate portrayal. So Matt, like, break it down. Like, why is Azure different, and why should people be redefining what infrastructure is in the cloud?
So there's a lot of metaphors that I think kind of work with the paradigm of like identity and cloud as infrastructure. But I think like the best one, I mean, Jerry, you and I are nerdy by nature, so you might appreciate this one.
Oh,
But
yeah.
like, okay, so we're playing a game of like civilization right now, right? And so very, very early on, with the advent of like the corporate network and the whatever semblance of the perimeter that we had, the mental model at the time was harden the perimeter, right? Harden your external firewall. Don't forward anything out to the external firewall that you don't want somebody accessing. And then everything on the internal of the network, don't worry about it. Unless there's like a big public facing exploit, we're not going to be too worried about that, right? Clearly that was very wrong. That was right. The kind of like metaphor extension of that is like we were all living in a castle town at that point, right? There's a big old castle. There's a king inside the castle. There's a whole bunch of knights walking around, and there's a wall outside that keeps everybody on the inside protected by the castle, right? But like as weapon technology developed, and as in the metaphor, hacker technology developed, the castle walls are no longer effective, right? Somebody brings a big old catapult or a cannon or something like that, and you're like, ah, shoot. Now we got to figure something else out, right?
Yeah.
That ended, and the metaphor is not perfect here, but like artillery ended the castle walls being like the best defense that we had, right? It ended the age of like the castles, right? And then that kind of ended the
weapon systems.
Yeah, they always have the impact on kind of like the paradigm of the time, right? And so artillery kind of made us move out of castles, and then like that became the advent of the city, et cetera, et cetera. But like think about how like when we don't have like the sense of a perimeter anymore, where is the business done, right? And the business is done by it's kind of like moving from the castle age into the age of information. It's done everywhere, right? In poorly configured environments, you can now just sign in with a browser and go to your company's resources. And there's so many places where like defenses could be put in place to say like, maybe you shouldn't be accessing this from this particular device, or maybe you shouldn't be accessing this from this particular IP address. But we're all still stuck in the castle age is kind of how I'm saying that. We're all still stuck in the corporate network perimeter is the security boundary. The identity, the paradigm of identity is the rapidly approaching truth that there is no castle wall anymore. Anybody really can access resources at any point just by proof of authorization and authentication, right? And when you live in that paradigm, the whole security model has to shift, because we're still thinking about cloud in the sense that it's just your data, like you said, it's your data center and in somebody else's computer. No, it is not. It is an entire ecosystem. It's an entire set of authentication, authorization, resource access. The idea of identity means that you could theoretically access a resource from wherever, from whatever device, as long as you prove who you are, right? So how does that change the threat model? It changes the threat model because now I can steal proof of authentication and authorization and access resources on somebody else's behalf. And no matter what cloud ecosystem you're working in, that is the underpinning of the threat model, is like forging or stealing or faking or skirting by and presenting proof of identity when you're not actually that person. And then that's kind of where we're kind of, that's the modern age, that we've moved out of the castles, right? And
Yeah. Well, and two things that jump out to me right away. Number one, like info stealers are like raging right now. Like
right,
Luma
yeah,
Stealer is very hot. Like Redline was pretty hot a couple years ago. And it's not just about credentials, it's like session tokens and all these other things
exactly, yeah.
for MFA bypass. So that definitely introduces a challenge. And I'd love your thoughts, Matt, on this. Not to derail you completely, but I'd love your thoughts. Like it used to be like identity and access management was like kind of part of IT's bag, and like you would be the operating system and the IT, maybe a domain admin or something
Right,
like that.
yeah.
In the cloud and stuff like that, with this level of importance around the identity, are you seeing more specialized, or do you think like, what are your thoughts around warranting specialized roles around that, not just management, but also configuration and setup?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like the divvying of responsibilities, because you need people that are engineers and architects on the back end, building the systems and maintaining the systems that allow for IAM and allow for resource access. But it's better to let them focus strictly on that, because that is a whole career's worth of work in and of itself. I tell my colleagues all the time, because Huntress, where I work right now, Huntress is looking to kind of diversify into different identity providers. And one of the things I keep repeating is like every single identity provider is a career's worth of security expertise and administration and architecture and engineering expertise, right? So yes, I do. There is it's really important to diversify your talents and have people covered down on the different areas of responsibility when it comes to the cloud, because they're all these massive monolithic ecosystems that have so much complexity and so many little gears and levers and switches and everything. You really do need to treat them as distinct areas of responsibility. If you are a cloud engineer or architect and you can speak the language of security and you have a good sense of security, that makes you an absolute powerhouse, right? But I think that's more than a 40-hour work week's worth of work right there, and I would not recommend that for anybody.
So, okay, so you've outlined here the thesis that, basically the identity is kind of the new castle wall, almost like microsegmentation, right? It's like everybody's got their own little castle wall around identity. And, lots of people, Azure basically has the largest footprint now, and, good on Microsoft for their business model of basically usurping AWS from a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So like obviously huge footprint, obviously threat landscape has changed. What is it that, obviously this is interesting to you. So what was your thought process? What kind of weaknesses have you uncovered in Azure that we need to know about?
Well, the first weakness is that it is a massive, monolithic, complex system of authentication and authorization. And in any system like that, I mean, like, so I came from red teaming Active Directory, right? And Active Directory, anybody who's done like Heath's TCM Security's practical ethical hacking, anybody who's done CRTO or any of the kind of red teaming Active Directory courses, you'll recognize that like, you need to learn the rules of the system. You need to learn how to play within this massive sprawling ecosystem, right? And Active Directory is just nothing but complexity and levers and switches. And there was like a 15-year period between when Active Directory was kind of released into the wild in the late 90s, I believe, and when the massive like wave of Active Directory research started, right? So we think like Kerberoasting was Tim Medin in 2013, 14 maybe. And so I think that was about 15 years after 1999, which is when Active Directory was released. So if you think about it, took 15 years in the system of Active Directory for people to understand and play with it and move the levers and switches and poke it just right to be like, what can I make this do that it wasn't designed to do, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine that we're just at the cloud is not new. Cloud has been around for a while. When people, I kind of like when people say it's the new endpoint. It's been around for a while. It's not new. The idea of attack surfaces applied to the cloud and how it is a bigger problem than most people identify is new. But yeah, there were like 15 years from Active Directory released to Active Directory major exploitation primitives identified. Think about where we're at with Azure right now, right? So you ask like, what are the major issues? Is that one, it's just understanding and identification of the attack surfaces. So then you get into, okay, what are the specific attack surfaces and specific like technical kind of attacks, right? And so it all really boils down to authentication, authorization, and being able to access resources that you shouldn't be able to access, whether that's stolen or forged credentials or something like that. Very specifically, I would say that like I kind of split like any good security practitioner, I try to segment the attack chain up into different parts, right? And so like initial access, a lot of credential theft, a lot of session theft, a lot of cred stealers running that steal session tokens and plain text credentials, God forbid if you have those, get posted up to a Telegram forum, and then somebody else did the dirty work of infecting you with a cred stealer, and then they sell your credentials on a Telegram forum somewhere, right? So whether they sell the password and you don't use MFA, that's like a cred attack, cred stuffing, password spraying, brute forcing, and then you can also replay the session cookie, which is usually stored in your browser. It's like a usability thing. You don't want to have to log in every single time to Azure, to M365. So your session cookie gets stored in your browser. If a cred scraper comes through, congratulations, you have a session now floating out on the dark web or a Telegram forum somewhere. And then that begs the question. So that's like, I split it up into like cred theft, passive session token theft, which is like a cred stealer stole your creds, but somebody else is replaying those creds. They didn't do the dirty work of stealing your cred, but they're replaying it, right? And then there's active session token theft. And I bet everybody in here is familiar with active session token theft. What comes to mind, Jerry, immediately when I say like active, like interacting with the user directly, you're trying to steal their session? What do you think is like the textbook attack in that case?
Well, phishing, right? I mean, that's what I would do.
Right?
Yeah.
And what specific for MFA protected identities, what do you think is specifically the even tool that's used in that particular scenario?
I'm not sure of the tool, honestly. I mean, is it? You tell me. I'm not sure, Matt.
Well, yeah. So Evil Jinx, I think, would be the one that most people point to because
Okay.
it's the one that is like you can find it on GitHub. That there's everybody loves the developer Kuba Gretzky. He's like a really great guy. It's a fantastic tool, right? Yeah, MITM, AITM, specifically
Yep.
Evil Jinx. And yet, I always like to bring up the fact that Evil Jinx, by if you segment out all of the data I've seen at Huntress by attacker toolkit or inferred attacker toolkit, because we don't always get like a one-for-one, like threat actors don't add a header into it that says, this is Evil Jinx. Evil Jinx is common, but it's not as common as people think. Really, the more popular adversary in the middle toolkits are the ones that are for purchase on the dark web. Naked Pages, Tycoon, Raccoon Stealer. There's some other ones out there, but like the Evil Jinx, I like to say that it's almost too much work for your average lazy cyber criminal because they don't want, I have to like git clone that and stand that up and write my own fishlet. I don't want to do that. I just want to pay some Bitcoin for ain't nobody got time for that. Exactly. I just want to pay some Bitcoin and get like a phishing kit stood up. Right. So most of the attacks, the active attacks that we see for our identities are not Evil Jinx. Every now and then I see one of those, but I fingerprint most of those as like Naked Pages is the hot one right now. But there's a rotating cast of tools that come through. But yeah, so that's the attack surface. And then after initial access, I know I'm on a massive diatribe right now, so just bear with me.
It's all value. Like everything you're saying is awesome. So keep going.
So initial access, we've got active session token theft, passive session token theft, credential stuffing, basically, if you don't use MFA. And then there's a couple little niche ones that I think we can get into here. We can talk a little bit about device code phishing here in a moment, but then you move to the next phase in the attack, which is like some kind of persistence. And so that's where like the OAuth app research came in. I took OAuth apps as the area of interest to say, there's not a lot of awareness about how these apps can be used for evil. Can they be used for persistence? Can they be used for initial access? Turns out the answer to both of those questions is yes. I looked at a lot of research from other researchers like Lena Lau, Inverse Costs. I took her course on attacking and defending M365. Bo Bullock, I met him at, actually, I'm wearing the t-shirt. Let's see, B-Sides Cayman Islands. I met Bo at B-Sides Cayman Islands, took his course on attacking and defending M365. And so I just started, of course, working off the shoulders of giants and all the research that kind of came before me. Shout out Bo. And shout out Lena. Dirk-Jan Malema. I read every blog post by Dirk-Jan. And I just started kind of building out like a research path of like trying to discover how often OAuth applications are being used in intrusions, right? And that was the genesis of like Cazadora. I presented that at B-Sides New York City, along with one of my colleagues, Christina Perry. And so that was like, all of that was kind of an encapsulation of this idea of like, what does persistence look like in Azure and M365? And OAuth apps are one such way of persistence. They're not the only way by any means. But yeah, that was kind of the next phase in the attack chain that I wanted to start to look at. That's the
and
blog right there.
This is one of Matt's blog posts that is a complementary piece, if you will, to the conversation that we're having today. I'm going to drop a link to this one in chat, but this isn't like something Matt did over the weekend. He's spent almost more than half a year digging into this and understanding what's going on with these type of attacks. And obviously you've got the tool that we're going to see a demo, but do you want to talk a little bit about the context of this blog post?
Yeah, absolutely.
What they can get from it?
So very early, in like August of last year, my leadership came to me at Huntress and said, what's the next area that you want to look at for Azure and M365, and like, where are we going to hunt down hackers next? By the way, I'll just take a side note here. My remit at Huntress is to like people have different like KPIs or outcomes or something like that. Like my marketing KPIs are to get like clicks up and send emails, and my sales KPIs are like, or the people that work at Huntress, their sales KPIs are like, sell the product, etc. I don't have any KPIs or outcomes that are related to like the business doing well. Literally, my prime directive handed down from the CEO, Kyle Hanselden specifically, is hit hackers harder. Identify more of them, higher true positives, lower false positives, even lower false negatives. So my performance at Huntress is basically gauged against a graduated cylinder of how many hackers did you stomp this year, right? So when they come to me and they say, what is the next place that you want to go to hunt down hackers? It is like, that's my prime directive basically, is to apply research and build out the product to hunt down hackers.
Yeah, you're basically RoboCop.
Sure, if it helps. So they came to me and they said, where do you want to look next? And so I look across the attack chain, and we covered down on initial access. We'd cracked down on that pretty well by looking at like VPN logins and data center logins and adversary in the middle and stuff. So that was kind of behind me at that point, but they were like, where are you going to go next? And so I thought back to Lena's course. I thought back to Sintra's course. And moving across the attack chain, which Lena wrote like an M365 and Azure attack matrix, right? And so she maps out across, you could probably Google and find it. She maps out across the different axes, basically like the MITRE attack matrix.
I'll pull it up. Keep talking.
Yeah, the applied tradecraft of each of those sections across the matrix, right? So the next place that I took a lot of interest in, because there has to be like a lot of things that go well to be able to hunt down hackers. Like you need to have a good research methodology applied to specific tradecraft, right? You need to be able to either create or find the telemetry needed. So any like detection engineers in the audience will know how difficult it is to be like, yeah, we have this idea of how we want to hunt down hackers, but we don't have any telemetry to be able to get that, right? And so you need like a lot of things to kind of like fall in line, or you need to go find a lot of things. That's the one right there.
Yeah.
So if you look from initial access, I took a good look at all of those and kind of we handled that. The work is ongoing.
Sorry about that.
But then we kind of move into the next phase, right? And so what's the next phase? OAuth apps can be used for initial access and persistence, right? And it was also an interesting area because it's one that I didn't understand anything at all. The system of why OAuth is even part of Azure was kind of a mystery to me at the time. I'd done a little bit in that course with building an OAuth consent grant attack and like giving it the permissions to be able to like create a user or access somebody's inbox, right? But it was all kind of like I was kind of coloring by the numbers at that point, and I really wanted to dig into like why this system even exists in the first place in Azure, and how it functions and how it is exploited, right? So fast forward. So I enlist the help of one of my colleagues at Huntress, who is Christina Perry, and she is one of the threat ops developers, right? And so I basically said in early August, Christina, I have this idea. I want to build an app that will use the Huntress product as a credential, right? Basically take a credential from the Huntress product, enumerate as much of the Huntress partner tenants that we can get, call the specific graph API endpoints to like scrape all of their applications, right? Every single OAuth application that they had installed. From there, I don't know where we're going to take this, but we'll have like a mountain of data and maybe something will reveal itself. And I don't know the definition of done. I don't know when we're going to start. I don't know when we're going to end. I don't even know what we're really going to do. And she basically said, when do we start? She was like, whose car are we taking? Like,
yeah.
totally
I love
down
it.
for right?
I love it.
So I was like, yes. So Christina and I work on that. We build a very rudimentary proof of concept to call the graph endpoints, right? And just poll everybody's applications, right? Pop quiz. In Azure, there are two different entities that represent applications. Does anybody in the chat know what those are? I didn't at the time, and this is a big old surprise to me.
And we are on about an 18-second delay,
All
so
right.
you do have to give chat an opportunity here.
That's all good. So while we are waiting for that, I'll say that the next phase was to build out a research methodology to analyze these apps at scale, right? And so we called this research project the Rogue App Project, right? And we split the tradecraft into two different distinct encapsulations of different attacks, right? On one hand, we have what we eventually started calling traitorware, right? Traitorware are OAuth apps in Azure that are not specifically built to be evil, but are often accompanying threat actors during intrusions. Really good example of this is the application called EM Client. And this is like anybody that's done any DFIR in the M365 space may know about this. It is an email client, just like the name would kind of recommend. Email clients that hackers, and it's a legitimate system, right? It's a legitimate application. You can go to the EM Client website right now and download this and use it just on your own. It organizes your inbox, and it organizes. And by the way, I think we got Clifton Alex Floyd says applications and services. Really, it's service principles, but yeah, you're right on the money. There are application registration objects and service principal objects. I'll get into what that means here in a moment. Now, where was I? So traitorware are apps that are not specifically designed to be evil, but like EM Client, you install it and you could use it legitimately to organize all your inboxes, but hackers love it because it allows you to organize and add multiple inboxes in the same email client. And if you're running business email compromise attacks, you need to, if you're trying to inject inbox rules to hide people's emails away from them before an invoice comes through and says, hey, where should we send the money? And then you strike, you grab the money before the other person does. You want as many inboxes in a central location as you can possibly get. Thus, that's why it's a favored technique. So I liken it to like a crowbar, where it's like a crowbar is a tool. It is neither good nor evil. If you use a crowbar to open like a crate of supplies for somebody, that's fine. If you're also using a crowbar to like open a window and you have a ski mask on, like the context is kind of like the context provides a little bit more urgency, right? So traitorware are like crowbars, and we see crowbars used a lot for good, but we also see them used for evil. So we take that as one distinct area of the attack surface. And the other one is what we eventually started calling stealthware, just as a shorthand. The long form name of these are OAuth consent grant attacks, and they're OAuth applications that are farm to table, hand artisanal crafted right from these divine hacker hands and delivered straight to your door for either persistence or initial access. They are built to be evil. There is no legitimate use. I'm talking apps that are called like ... that find their way into your tenant at some point. And just so happen to have the OAuth permissions granted so that this application can access somebody's inbox, send mails, write inbox rules, right? So you have to treat these two distinct areas very differently, right? Because the traitorware threat model is like, we need to watch for how these apps are being used and maybe kind of in adjacency to the other parts of the attack that are going on. And stealthware is like, this doesn't exist anywhere else. It has the permissions required to run a business email compromise attack. Literally in one tenant in the Huntress partner set, we've seen this exactly one time, right? So you kind of treat that as its own threat model, right? So Christina and I, we research, we put our findings together, we present at B-Sides New York City. And then I say, at that point, we had researched about 8,000 tenants of the Huntress partners tenancy. All of the findings from this are rolled up in that blog post, but I'll summarize them here. About 10% of the Huntress partner tenancy everybody that we surveyed from the 8,000 partner tenants data set had about 10% had at least one traderware app that we commonly see in attacks, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of those traderware apps are evil, but if you look at the response from when we assert that an instance of that app is evil in progress, and the partner comes back and says, "Oh no, that's totally fine. We're using EM client legitimately." The percentage of that is so low that it is always better to detect it and let the partner tell us that we're wrong at that point.
Yeah.
And so like EM client, 98%, Cloud Sponge, 94%. They're all above 95% basically. Or I'm sorry, EM client was like 98%. Cloud Sponge was like 96%. What I'm trying to say is that they're all basically above 95% confidence, right?
Yeah, like if it's there, it's
Right,
most
exactly.
you can bet money and feel comfortable about it that it's or
Exactly.
it's malicious. Yeah,
Or being used maliciously, right? The app itself is neither good nor bad because it's traderware. It's like you could go to, EM client right now and download it and use it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now,
Cert util is fine.
yeah,
Too.
exactly. The best analog for this is like a BYO RMM, right? Because it's not there, but it's not a lol bin. It's not there by default, basically almost ever. But it is like a BYO RMM. It's like you're bringing a legitimate tool. It's like if you were to bring cert util to the endpoint and then use that, that would be a good summary, right? Now, traderware. Okay, so apps that are every app has a dark side. Apps that are being used evilly, even though they're not necessarily evil. Let's go to the other side. This was the fun one. This was the really interesting one. Stealthware assumes that this is a customized application. It is built to have the correct permission, OAuth permissions, to be able to access somebody's like mailbox on their behalf, right? And so that gets into like the system of authentication and authorization in OAuth, right? An app can be delegated for a particular identity to access resources, usually the Graph API, on their behalf. So Stealthware has some very interesting attributes, right? It's going to be globally unique or installed in a massive, like hardly any tenants, right? So like we're talking, there are 18, almost 19 million service principals under watch at Huntress at this point, right? So you take 19 million as your denominator, right? And your percentage is basically 1 or 2 or 3 out of 19 million. That is like 0.00 math 1% of all tenants, right? So they're going to be like globally unique or I'm talking like extraordinary orders of magnitude rare, right? And they're going to have very specific attributes for what permissions they need to be able to function, right? And so when you take those two facts together, it's the advent of this idea of a hunting methodology for rare and powerful applications, right? If they're globally unique or extremely rare, and they have permissions that allow certain patterns of tradecraft to be able to be executed. I didn't weird passive voice there, but like if you can execute specific tradecraft patterns based on the permissions that are granted for that app, then all you really need at that point is to socially engineer somebody to install that app. Or if you already if you're already in the tenants, you can install it yourself, right? Usually these are going to be custom built in the tenants, and that makes an application registration object in addition to a service principal. But sometimes they are built in the attacker's tenants, and in that case, it's like installing any other app from another tenant. It just asks, hey, do you want a local instance of this application? I guess very briefly, the difference between an app registration and the service principal. App reg, custom template for an app. If you're a developer and you want somebody else to use your application, you write the code, you do all the authentication stuff, and then you build an app registration that lives in your tenant, and then you advertise, you make a website or something, and somebody else can install that. When they install that application, they create a service principal in their tenant. The service principal is just like an Active Directory, the local instantiation of that application, right? So there can be lots and lots and lots of service principals. There's usually one app registration for any given application. Anyway, so how do we hunt stealthware? Well, orders of magnitude rarity and powerful permissions. And then inevitably, these apps are named something absolutely crazy, Jerry. Like 3 X's. I found one. One is just slap the keyboard. One was like a string of dots, just like
So they're not trying to
yeah.
hide in plain
No.
sight with like NT-util or
Well, yes. They also there's some proof point threat intel that calls out specifically like test app or text app or a very interesting one. The app is named the user's the UPN of the user that has been infected by it is the name of the application. So lowpriv at huskyworks.onmicrosoft.com is literally the app name, and it has infected the lowpriv at huskyworks, et cetera, user, right? So so we've defined our tradecraft to hunt, right? We've defined our methodologies to hunt it. So the last thing to do is basically build an engine that can do that, right? And so that's I'm blessed to be in a position where I have enough data to support those hypotheses at Huntress. But while I was doing that, I was like, from the findings of that, of building the product at Huntress, I basically said, this is a much bigger problem than I think anybody is aware of. I'm talking like a double-digit percentage of all of the tenants, not the surveyed ones, not the 8,000 tenants, but all Huntress tenants have instances of these applications. And I was like, I got to do something. And so I was like, what is the fastest possible way that I can get this information into the hands of the masses? And writing the blog post and releasing Cazadora were the fastest ways to do that. So I took a little bit of the hunting methodology that we'd been refining and building for the last 6 months, and I encapsulated it into the simplest Python script. This thing is like, it's like 2 moving parts, basically. And just the absolute simplest Python script that I could possibly get. And thus Cazadora was born. And I put it out on LinkedIn, and it went, I guess, viral because it's really interesting because, like, I don't know, I was like, I don't think people are really understanding how like dangerous OAuth applications can be. And I guess that resonated with people. And yet I still had a bunch of developers, like Azure engineers and Azure developers, come back to me and say, oh yeah, we actually enforce admin consent for all application installs. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, do that. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
but
do more of that.
But unfortunately, my customers, like, the data has shown that they are not. And I was like, this is like, let's get some intel out into the community. Let's get the fastest possible way. It takes 5 minutes to run this thing. Let's just get something open source out there so that everybody can do. And it's not, Cazadora is not like the be all end all answer here. It can't find everything. But it is a really good starting point for just some of the patterns that I've already observed. And hackers are going to change up their tactics, but like, I'm witnessing the patterns that are in Cazadora that we hunt for that by using Cazadora. I see that happen in a feed of, as we onboard Huntress partners. I just see a few a day, 10 a day, 20 a day. And I'm like, it's still a problem. Like hackers haven't changed their tradecraft to the point where a simple little script that just does a little bit of regex basically can't find it. So I was like, as always, I throw it back to my good friend Dre, who is the SOC manager from the UK team at Huntress. He wrote in a blog regarding slash and grab. So this is like last year, but the big RMM screen connect vulnerability. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, we had John.
Yeah. So Dre wrote in a blog post about all of the tradecraft that we found for that. Roughly paraphrasing, quoting, hackers are very rarely inventive. They always run the same patterns for the most part, and we can beat them by data analysis and applying data to hunting them down. So that's Cazadora right there. It is a dead simple. It's like I'm trying to teach the world how to throw one good punch, and this is one good punch for OAuth apps.
Sometimes that's all you need to define yourself. And I got to tell you, the blog post or the LinkedIn post that Matt is referring to is literally what I saw. And that's when I reached out. I said, Matt, like you got to come on. This is awesome. Like, we got to tell everybody. You want to like pop the hood on this sucker and
sure. Yeah.
Gas it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we go. A 3, a 2, a 1, boom. OBS transition. Look at that. We got the circle cam and everything. Okay. So Cazadora, like I said, I wanted it to be as simple as possible. Right. And so, it is literally, actually, I could just like code and show you all. Just, it's open source. Each module, I write Python in like little modules basically. So like there's usually like a source directory right here. And so inside of the source, there's auth, collector, hunt, and then a logo, basically. And each of these is like 80 to 100 lines of Python. You can go through here, and it's I try to make it as readable as possible. You can audit all of this just so you know that just as if putting my name and Huntress's name behind this weren't enough, you can know that it's definitely 100% not sus. So go ahead, go give the code a read. But like the very important parts here are just the authentication, which we're going to use device code authentication. And I'll explain that here in a moment. But also the hunting part of this is the core of the logic here, because basically all this is a wrapper to call the Graph API, scrape a whole bunch of your, or really scrape all of your tenants' applications and some other information from your tenants, and then just like dump that to JSON and then just run some hunting logic against that, right? So, I have a Docker file in there because I also, much like everybody else on Earth, don't like messing with Python dependencies, right? So you can run it in Docker. There is a way to sign in with the web clients using the Azure SDK. If you do that in Docker, it doesn't work very well. If you do that in WSL, it doesn't work very well. So I'd recommend just using the default mode, which is device code authentication, if you're going to run it in Docker or WSL, right? But I have all of the dependencies installed. So we can just call python3 main.py. You can even output it to out.json to get all of the JSON that is returned from calling the API, right? So let's run this bad Larry, right? So Cazadora, Treehouse script, et cetera, et cetera. So it's authenticating to Azure. So if you've never used device code authentication before, what you have to do is go to Microsoft.com/device login. This script has generated a custom code for you. Do not ever, ever, ever give anybody this code, right? Much like I'm doing right now, but there's an 18-second delay, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. And also, do not ever, and I'm actually going to like move back to the thing here. Do not ever in 100 years, ever punch in a device code from something that you did. If you did not expect to get that device code, if it came out of nowhere and it says you have to log in right now, punch in a device code, don't do it. You're getting phished. We can talk about that in a moment after the demo for the device code blog. Anyway, so I just have to go over here and finish the authentication here. And so here we go. And there we go. And I'm already signed into my global admin. It then says, are you trying to sign into Microsoft Office? And I chose the Office client for a reason. It has the permissions required to be able to call the Graph API. So let's go ahead and hit continue. And it is going to run the collection. Right now, it's calling a whole bunch of Graph API endpoints. It calls the endpoints for the application registrations. It calls the endpoints for the service principals. It calls the endpoints for your users. And it calls the endpoints for, I think, just the tenant in general, just to get the tenant information, right? So this is going to run for a little bit. I think my ISP is rate limiting me when I call the Graph API. Other people have run this and they've been like, oh, it worked instantly. I have a tinfoil hat theory that my ISP has seen the massive amounts of data that I'm trying to call from the graph and are rate limiting me now. In any case, when this is done, we now have the hunt results section, and this is literally just in the tradition of all the great red team tools that came before me. It is just, it runs the thing, it prints the results, and you can dump it out to a JSON file if you so desire. And it runs a whole bunch of hunting logic against the results of this, right? And it kind of color codes it too. So there's like confidence levels, right? So like something just called test app might not be a big problem. Maybe it is actually a developer that's in the tenant somewhere that's using the application. But also the proof point threat intel that I used as part of the research for this calls out specifically that a lot of these OAuth consent grant attacks, the stealthware paradigm, they are called things like test or test app or text app. I want to say of the like 6,000 that we found, a good chunk of these were like this or adjacent or something like that, right? Test app, text app, something like that. So medium confidence, high confidence, or extremely high confidence. I borrow from like WinPeas here with the highlighting, right? So it's just a quick way of identifying like what to triage immediately. So I say that, and that's it. That's it. It says audit the enterprise apps and the app registrations. If you don't know what I'm talking about with that, we can go right to the Azure login portal. And I just got to log in here. Oh, let me just go back to home. If you don't know where to look for these, right? Go to Azure if you're like an engineer or you have the global admin permissions, right? And so you can go right up here and you can go down and search for either app registrations or enterprise applications, right? So app registrations, these are your custom template objects for your applications, right? And then we also have enterprise, and they were in the recents there, but I just want to show everybody actually like bare bones where to go to look to find this stuff, right? If you go over to all applications, you can see every custom application that's been built in your tenant. I would hope that a lot of you are not going to see things like not a backdoor, definitely not a backdoor, sussy baka, whatevs, test app. I hope that you don't see that. I hope you don't see things like this with the dots, right? And then over in the application registrations, these are the service principals. These are the individual installed enterprise apps that you can go somewhere else and install them in your tenant, right? And so I've got like Sussy Baka, definitely not a backdoor. I've got the Hunter Security Platform app there, which is always funny. But yeah, that's it, Jerry. Like that, again, teaching the world how to throw one good punch here. Go, if you see anything in here, go audit your apps. If you don't see anything in here, go audit your apps. Like this is a very a not frequently understood, a not very well understood attack surface that I've already found data to back up that this is like more prolific. It's not like apocalyptic by any means. It's not like, you know, millions of these things exist out there, or maybe it is from what I can tell. I don't know.
Well, as
But
you
it is
said
common.
earlier, you know, a lot of these malware as a service dark web marketplaces are offering turnkey solutions.
Yes, exactly.
So, you know, I could see it scaling up quite quickly if one was offered at a reasonable price point.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so let me ask you a couple questions,
Yeah.
Matt. So first of all, your tool does not dump the application registrations, right? You have to go into Azure to review it.
No, it totally does. It dumps the metadata about the app registrations. In fact, actually, let me cut back to my fancy little circle cam here. If we were to just code against out.json, which was the full JSON output of what I got there. So you can see that we have two distinct sections here. We have the applications, all of the JSON from polling the applications endpoint, and then we've got the service principals endpoint, right? So the applications are those specific custom template apps. And that's like fits in with the stealthware threat model, right?
Okay.
So this has all and like there's more here than what was represented in the output of Cazadora, because this is just for triage. This is like, go find this immediately if you see anything here. But if you want all of the information, who's using the application, any credential objects that have been installed, whether they're installed for the sign-in audience of Microsoft internal, single tenant or multi-tenant and personal account, you get that here too. What else is in here? There's all kinds of good stuff in here. App roles, the groups and users that are allowed to use this, the password credentials. This is the method of persistence, by the way. If you have a password credential installed for an application, you can sign in as that application with a single factor. So that's the method of persistence. Gives you all granularity down to like the scopes. And you got to look up each of these, but like these scopes are probably like, this scope allows you to call the graph to read somebody's emails. This scope allows you to call the graph to create a user account or something like that, right? Redirect URLs, all kinds of information in the long form here. So yeah, take a look at this. This is a lot. I mean, this is for my test bed tenant, which by all accounts is not really like super active. We're up to tens, hundreds, thousands. We're up to the 35,000, 36,000 lines here, right? And there's my one Husky Boy user right there. Anyway, so
well, and I'm just thinking it'd be practical as well for. Let me change the screen here. It's just practical. Because if you're going to go in and look at the registrations, if you can just dump it, since it's in JSON, if you could just output the display name of all the apps, just so you could do a quick sniff test.
Right. Yeah.
Also, excuse me, Lee Mager over on LinkedIn is saying, you know, make sure you're not using global admin. Like, just because you're a good guy doesn't mean you shouldn't use least privilege in order to do all of the things.
Fair point. It's my test bed tenant. I huck malware at that thing all hours of the day. But yeah, please adhere to your security, your least privilege and best practice. So yeah, try to.
We do have some questions in chat about
absolutely,
this. But I want to ask the first one because, you know, I fancy myself, you know, knowledgeable, but like one of the things that you talk about as an indicator of concern, maybe not compromise, you said it's named after a user account, it's a test app, arbitrary strings, ... etc. But one was anonymous reply URLs to local hosts. Now you said in the blog post port 7823, but ports can be changed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you help me appreciate why the loopback is like? I wouldn't necessarily think loopback is bad. I would, obviously if it's like C2 infrastructure, I'm going to be like, oh, but can you help me appreciate that?
Yeah. So the reply URL is very interesting in a mechanical sense. It's where a credential, like, so when you authenticate as the application, or you like delegate, you accept and consent for that application. That is where the credential of that application gets sent. Now, in Lena's course, you learn how to use that. You basically stand up a listener, and it's going to be at like an ngrok IP, or like, some weird IP. And when you authenticate you delegate access for that app and authenticate, the JWT for that authentication hits that listener, right? So that's your callback URL. That is where the credentials go, right?
I see.
Now, I hate to invoke the scientists don't really understand how this happens yet, but I will say that like that the very specific mechanics of that, I haven't quite figured out yet. But I will say that Proofpoint calls that out specifically as an indicator of MACT campaign 1445. MACT stands for malicious applications in cloud credible tenants. So they did a bunch of research, and they found a rash of these, I'm now calling stealthware applications, that had that as a particular indicator, right? So I'm not totally sure why it would be localhost. I'm not totally sure why it would go to access. And I'm just being totally honest about just the limits of my understanding here. But I know that when I applied that as a hunting methodology, and we regex the port, because the port can be basically anything, but it's basically localhost port / access, cut the regex there. Hit rate was in the 98% plus category, right? It's just an unbelievable amount of apps that fit that description. And that wouldn't by itself would not be an issue, but then you also look at the apps and their names, and they're delegated for a single user, single identity, and they have permissions for that user's mailbox, right? So it's a little bit of, you got to cluster and look at the whole constellation there. But that is a key indicator. And that's why it's kind of high up on the extreme, because it's like, that particular pattern has led to finding a massive amount of these apps in the Huntress partner tenancy. So that's why it's up there. And the research continues for why that actually functions that way.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that it has a little bit of mystery to it, because when I saw it, I'm like, I hope to God this doesn't have a basic answer that I don't know. But no, I appreciate that. So if you see local host and then either port 7823 or really any port with a / access, that's something to be alert on. A couple other questions coming in, and I've pinned the Cazadora GitHub repo that Matt has made. This open source project available. You can go run it on your environment right now and get some interesting intel. Nick Barker wants to know, is there any, is it, he spelt it wrong, but that's okay. Is Cazadora complete, or is this a work in progress? What are we looking like on the roadmap?
Man, because this is kind of like a community facing resource. I want to arm everybody up with more information, more intel. It's a matter of time at this point. So I've got to like set some time to devote to it. But as I get like data backed findings about what would lead to a disproportionately high amount of true positives, I'll add more hunting logic to Cazadora. But yeah, for right now, it was a matter of, let me just get the bare minimum to like the least amount of effort into the highest hit rate out into the hands of the public. So maybe as I have time, I'll try to develop it a little bit more. But for right now, I don't have any like set plans to at this point.
Yeah, well, and it's open source, so if you're feeling fancy, you can.
Yeah, no, PR is welcome, please.
Request.
Yeah, no, so I'm just like, these days I'm very busy, but like, I would love to. I think there's one PR open, and I haven't devoted some time to review it. But please, if you have any ideas, the PRs are open. I love working with developers, and actually, it was like, I started with device code authentication, and somebody in the comments of the LinkedIn post was like, why didn't you use the Azure SDK for web sign in? And I was like, because I don't know what that is, man. And he was like, no, I got you. Don't worry. So he showed me how to do that. And I was like, easiest PR ever. So please, if you have time, I'd love to review it. I'd love for your feedback.
Suyukti wants to know about the course from Lena that you
Yeah, yeah.
talked about.
Attacking and I don't want to get the name wrong because that's the yeah, you have it up there, don't you?
It's this
Okay,
one.
attacking and defending Azure and M365. So this is really cool because it starts. It's the build fluency in the systems, and how they interact, and then understand that through the lens of attack and defense. And then just like the old Musashi quote, when you know the way broadly, you're going to see it in everything at that point. Apply the attack and defense methodology to Azure, and it's a really good lens. It's a really good way to build a foundation of where to go in terms of just demystifying all of Azure itself. But yeah, that it's a little a little bit pricey, but I would put my name behind saying that that course is worth the price. And hopefully you can get like your employer to pay for it if you're an identity red teamer or like an Azure engineer or an architect or something. But highly recommend it. And she updates it all the time too. Like all those little things with the red marks next to them are like new modules that have been added since I graduated the course. Right. So, yeah, definitely worth your time. Absolutely worth your time. Fantastic. And Bo Bollock's course, every time he runs that, sometimes he runs it virtually. Sometimes he does it for free because that's just the dude he is. He's like the nicest dude on earth. And then I took it at B-Sides Cayman Islands. So he runs it as a workshop too, but he does an attacking M365 and Azure course as well. I would put my endorsement behind both of those as good resources that are worth your time.
This is that course that he's talking about. It's called Breaching the Cloud. This is Bo. I think he shaved his beard actually, but I mean, not that would change the quality, but it's so iconic. But this is that course right here, and he did actually run a pay what you can version of this course not too long ago. And I don't know if Zach's still here, but I want to say like something like 1,000 or 1,100 people signed up for it and took it. Like so. Yeah, it's out there. It's killing it.
Yeah, Bo is as nice as as nice as the legends, as nice as the reputation. Like he's so kind with his time. And I was like, I attended B-Sides during like the height of the chaos of the research for OAuth apps, and I was like, Bo, I got to straighten these things out. Like I don't know what APIs to call. I don't know. I was in spiraling basically, and he was like, breathe. Let's walk me through it. What does the code do? He pointed out some stuff. He's just super kind with his time, and a real gentleman, and just a practitioner's practitioner too. So
I love that you're at Cayman Islands, which is like, like super hot. Like, it's basically like the Bali of the Eastern, or Western hemisphere. And you're spiraling.
The work doesn't stop, man. I mean, but yeah, that's RJ Sudlow and James McGarvey. And there are like a bunch of other people involved in that, but RJ and James were the two primary points of contact.
Yeah.
And they put on an amazing B-Sides. And they're aware that like having practitioners come out to the Cayman Islands for a B-Sides is a tall ask. And so I would again put my endorsement behind, if you can make time, if you can get out there. They run an absolutely amazing B-Sides. It was the most like personal, welcoming B-Sides that I think I've ever attended. So
I was supposed to go last year, but it was on Halloween.
Right. Yeah, it was on Halloween.
Yeah.
I didn't get I was going to be, those wacky, wavable, arm flailing Superman? I was going to get one of those costumes, but I was like, how am I going to get that? I'm not checking a bag. So
TSA is like, want to explain this to us?
So that was going to be my my costume. I can't believe we're at the top of the hour, Jerry. That was like, I blinked and it's over, man.
I know. That's what happens when you deliver value. Oh, before we let you go, Matt, I mean, I know you're doing a ton of work. You're at Huntress, you're speaking. Anything that people should be thinking about or where you want them to connect with you?
Yeah, like I said, I've taken a bit of a retreat from my kind of content and social media right now because I'm really in like research mode right now. So I don't think find me on LinkedIn. That's about the only place that I'm active anymore.
Are you going to be at a conference this summer or this fall?
To be determined.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure. But no, I mean, I don't have anything to you've seen my projects, you've seen some of the stuff I'm working on. So I don't have any like upcoming YouTube videos or anything like that, but I will just take the time to say like, take care of yourself. This is a very intense career. If you're in this, no matter if you're on the security side or the engineering side or anything, just please take care of yourself. Like we need you now more than ever. And that's all I have to say. I really appreciate everybody's time, everybody's questions. Jerry, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you bringing me on here. And like I said, I will always make time for a Jerry Auger interview any day of the week.
I love it, Matt. Yeah. So we've been talking with Matt Kiely. If you jumped in halfway through, whatever, this is absolutely a must go back and rewatch it. I know some of you, Code Brew, for example, said you're going to have to go watch this again. Matt dropped an incredible amount of information, both at a theory level of why Azure is vulnerable in most instances, plus a tool called, let me get the name right so I don't screw it up here, Cazadora, that you can download right now from GitHub and pull down. And it's not an end all be all magic bullet, but it certainly can help you identify, sussy apps, if you will, sussybaka apps.
Sussybaka apps.
Yep. And take care of that. So on behalf of the entire Simply Cyber community, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us and making this tool and helping us all be better, frankly. So thank you.
Thank you. Again, like I said, anytime, Jerry. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everybody. That does it for today's Renegade Simply Cyber Firesides. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay secure.
Take care.